The glint of metal caught the late afternoon sun, sharp and undeniable, reflecting a blinding shard of light right into my eyes. Brenda Mae, her face a mask of furious indignation, held it steady, her knuckles white around the grip, pointing it right at me. "You think you can just ignore the rules, officer," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of raw rage and what sounded alarmingly like triumph. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple, not from fear, but from the sudden, humid shift in the air. My gaze remained level, unwavering, my own hand instinctively hovering near my hip, a habit born of years of ingrained muscle memory. She couldn't possibly know that the officer she spoke of wasn't just some casual nickname, a generic, dismissive title she'd cooked up to imply I was simply a meddling busybody. She couldn't know that the very uniform she imagined me disrespecting, that she believed I was scoffing at with my casual defiance of a meticulously placed garden gnome, was the one I wore under my civilian clothes every day, folded neatly in my closet, ready for duty. And the badge she scoffed at, that she seemed to believe was merely a metaphorical symbol of my non-compliance, was the exact same one I'd earned through years of dedicated service, countless sacrifices, and a deep commitment to upholding the peace. The thought formed, quiet and firm in my mind, a silent, internal declaration: she has no idea who she just threatened. What would happen next in this strangely serene, yet suddenly volatile, suburban standoff? Would the manufactured tranquility of our quiet Willow Creek street shatter into irreversible chaos, leaving a permanent scar on the community, or would calm somehow prevail, a thin, fragile thread holding everything together against the gathering storm? My journey to Willow Creek had been a conscious retreat, a deliberate step back from the relentless pace of a demanding life. After 2 decades serving as a sheriff in a bustling metropolitan area, dealing with everything from petty disputes to serious emergencies, I was ready for a different kind of peace. My name is David Anderson, and I had seen enough of the city's underbelly to appreciate the quiet hum of crickets on a summer evening, the gentle rustle of leaves in a mature oak tree, and the simple joy of an unobstructed view of the night sky. Willow Creek, with its manicured lawns, winding streets, and a reputation for being a family-friendly haven, seemed like the perfect antidote. It was a place where I hoped to trade the sirens for bird calls, and the tension of active duty for the peaceful rhythm of neighborhood life. My little bungalow, with its welcoming front porch and a surprisingly spacious backyard, felt like a breath of fresh air. It was a blank canvas, ready for me to paint a new chapter, one filled with quiet mornings and relaxed evenings. I moved in during a glorious spring, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and freshly cut grass. The first few weeks were a blur of unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and discovering hidden gems in my new surroundings. I met my neighbors quickly. Across the street lived the Miller family. Sarah, a kind-faced woman with a contagious laugh, and her son, Tommy, a bright-eyed boy who was always eager to help. Sarah was one of the first to greet me, bringing over a warm apple pie, a gesture that immediately made Willow Creek feel like home. She told me about the neighborhood potlucks, the annual 4th of July parade, and the community garden, where residents shared plots and harvested their own produce. Her genuine warmth was a stark contrast to the guarded anonymity I had grown accustomed to in the city. Tommy, with his boundless energy, would often wave to me from his yard, sometimes even kicking a soccer ball my way, inviting a spontaneous game of catch. I enjoyed these simple interactions, finding a quiet joy in their straightforward kindness. I quickly joined the community garden. It was a humble plot of land at the edge of the neighborhood, divided into small sections, each tended by a resident. Digging in the soil, feeling the earth beneath my hands, was surprisingly therapeutic. It was a peaceful activity, far removed from the high-stakes decisions I once made daily. There, I met Olivia, a retired schoolteacher who had a green thumb and an endless supply of gardening tips. She was a fount of local knowledge, sharing stories about the neighborhood's history and its eccentricities. Her gentle guidance and shared wisdom made the hours fly by. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, learning about organic pest control and the best time to plant tomatoes. Olivia, with her quiet grace, embodied the sense of community that had drawn me to Willow Creek. She always had an encouraging word, a thoughtful insight, and a way of making everyone feel valued, fostering a spirit of cooperation rather than competition. Her calm demeanor was a balm to my soul, a stark reminder of the simple beauty of human connection. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, in Willow Creek seemed, at first glance, like a benign entity. Its primary function, as explained in the thick welcome packet I received, was to maintain the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood and ensure a harmonious living environment. Rules covered everything from lawn maintenance and fence heights to paint colors and mailbox designs. It seemed reasonable enough. After all, well-kept homes contribute to property values, and a cohesive look can enhance a neighborhood's appeal. I attended a few of the monthly meetings, held in the small community center near the entrance to Willow Creek. The meetings were usually quiet affairs, discussing minor issues like street light repairs or the scheduling of the annual neighborhood garage sale. I mostly listened, observing the dynamics, a habit from my years of policing. Most of the residents seemed to appreciate the HOA's efforts, seeing it as a necessary evil that kept the neighborhood looking tidy. However, even in those early, seemingly peaceful days, a subtle undercurrent began to reveal itself, a faint ripple disturbing the otherwise placid surface of Willow Creek. It almost always emanated from one particular source, Brenda Mae, a woman who seemed to embody the very essence of overzealous authority. Brenda Mae was a permanent fixture on the HOA board, her presence as ubiquitous as the perfectly pruned rose bushes that lined her meticulously kept driveway. She was a woman of precise habits and unwavering opinions, with a penchant for scrutinizing every detail of neighborhood life. Her eyes, often narrowed, seemed to miss nothing, from a slightly overgrown hedge to a trash can left out an hour too long on collection day. One sunny afternoon, I was watering the newly planted hydrangeas in my front yard when I saw her. Brenda Mae was walking her tiny poodle, which she referred to as Sir Reginald, a yapping ball of fluff that seemed to possess the same nervous energy as its owner. She stopped abruptly in front of Mr. Henderson's house, a sweet old man who lived a few doors down. Mr. Henderson, a widower, wasn't as spry as he used to be, and his lawn, though generally neat, sometimes had a patch or two that grew a little longer than the HOA's stringent 3-inch maximum. Brenda Mae didn't just walk past. She pulled out a small, metallic tape measure from her purse, knelt down, and meticulously measured a blade of grass. Then, she pulled out a small notebook and jotted something down, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. It seemed overly fastidious, even for an HOA. Later that week, I saw Mr. Henderson struggling to push his old lawnmower. Without a second thought, I walked over and offered to help. He gratefully accepted, and I spent a pleasant hour cutting his lawn, exchanging stories about his late wife and his grandchildren. It was a simple act of kindness, a natural extension of the empathy I carried with me. I wasn't doing it to spite Brenda Mae, but simply because it was the right thing to do. However, as I packed up my mower, I noticed Brenda Mae watching from her window, a curtain slightly parted, her expression unreadable. A chill, faint but definite, touched the warm afternoon air. The minor incidents continued to pile up, like small stones accumulating at the bottom of a pond. A notice on a neighbor's door about a non-standard birdbath. A passive-aggressive comment at a potluck about certain residents' questionable taste in outdoor holiday decorations. Brenda Mae's presence was a constant, low-level hum of scrutiny, a background static in the otherwise pleasant symphony of Willow Creek. She seemed to thrive on enforcing rules, on finding imperfections, on exercising a subtle, yet pervasive, form of control. It wasn't overtly malicious, not yet, but it chipped away at the easygoing atmosphere of the neighborhood, replacing genuine connection with an underlying tension. The first truly extreme event, however, wasn't directed at me, but it sent a clear message through the community, a ripple of unease that grew into a wave of quiet outrage. It involved the community's annual Little League end-of-season celebration, a beloved tradition. Every year, the parents of the winning team would host a small, informal party at the neighborhood park, complete with a potluck, games, and an inflatable bouncy castle for the kids. It was a joyous occasion, a chance for neighbors to celebrate their children's achievements and enjoy a warm summer evening together. This year, James and Olivia, a young couple who had just moved into a house near the park, were hosting. They were known for their generosity and their vibrant spirits, always ready to lend a hand or share a laugh. They had spent weeks planning, securing the bouncy castle, organizing games, and sending out invitations. The entire community was looking forward to it. The day of the party arrived, bright and sunny, promising a perfect evening. The park buzzed with activity. Kids shrieked with delight as they bounced in the castle, parents chatted convivially, and the aroma of barbecue wafted through the air. James was just setting up the last of the picnic tables when Brenda Mae arrived. She wasn't carrying a dish for the potluck. Instead, she clutched a thick binder, its pages filled with documents, and her face wore the stern, unyielding expression I had come to recognize. She approached James and Olivia, bypassing the greetings and general festivities. Her voice, though not a shout, carried an unsettling authority that cut through the joyful noise. "James, Olivia," she began, her tone clipped, "I regret to inform you that this celebration is in violation of several HOA covenants." James, visibly taken aback, stammered, "Violation?" "Brenda Mae, this is the annual Little League party. We've done this every year." Brenda Mae opened her binder, her finger meticulously tracing lines on a printed page. Section 4.7.b, Temporary Structures. "The inflatable bouncy castle," she declared, pointing a slender, manicured finger at the towering, colorful structure, "is considered a temporary structure that was not approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Furthermore, Section 6.2.a, Noise Ordinances, stipulates that amplified sound, including excessive laughter and shouting from minors, is prohibited after 6 p.m. on weekdays." And, she paused, looking around at the array of food and smiling faces, "there's also the matter of Section 5.1.c, unauthorized commercial activity. While I understand this is a private event, the sheer scale of the gathering and the use of the common park area without a formal permit from the HOA board is simply unacceptable." A stunned silence fell over the immediate area, the playful shouts of the children suddenly seeming amplified in the sudden quiet. James and Olivia looked at each other, their faces a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. Other parents started to gather, their smiles fading, replaced by confused frowns. "Brenda Mae," Olivia said, her voice laced with incredulity, "this is a neighborhood park. It's for everyone. And the bouncy castle has been here for 2 hours already, why are you bringing this up now?" Brenda Mae remained impassive. "Ignorance of the rules is no excuse, Olivia. As a member of the HOA board, it is my duty to ensure compliance. You have 2 options. Either dismantle this unauthorized structure and disperse this gathering immediately, or face a fine of $500 and further disciplinary action, including the suspension of your park access privileges for 6 months. The kids, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere, began to quiet down, their bright faces now mirroring the somber expressions of their parents. Tommy Miller, who had been laughing just moments before, edged closer to his mom, Sarah, his eyes wide. The joy had been sucked out of the air, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. Brenda Mae stood there, unyielding, her presence casting a long, bureaucratic shadow over what was supposed to be a carefree celebration. The sheer audacity of her demand, the abrupt and cold manner in which she delivered it, was a shock to everyone. It was a clear and unambiguous display of power, a stark reminder that even in a seemingly idyllic community, control could be wielded with an iron fist, capable of crushing the simplest joys under the weight of meticulously enforced, often absurd, regulations. The bouncy castle, a symbol of innocent fun, now seemed to deflate under the weight of her words, its vibrant colors dulling in the deepening twilight. The party was effectively over, not with a bang, but with the chilling whisper of bureaucratic decree. Brenda Mae's pronouncement hung heavy in the air, a thick, suffocating blanket that snuffed out the laughter and replaced it with a palpable tension. The cheerful sounds of the children, moments before so full of life, faded into a hushed murmur. It was as if a sudden, unexpected cold front had swept through the park, freezing everyone in place. James and Olivia, their faces a mixture of shock and betrayal, stood rooted to the spot, their dreams of a perfect party dissolving before their eyes. Other parents, who had been enjoying the festive atmosphere, now exchanged uneasy glances, a collective understanding dawning on them that Brenda Mae was deadly serious. Her posture was rigid, her expression unwavering, a clear indication that no amount of pleading or reasoning would sway her. The Little League celebration, a tradition cherished for years, had been hijacked by a set of obscure rules and an unyielding will. I watched the scene unfold from a slight distance, my sheriff's training kicking in almost instinctively. I observed the body language, the shifting dynamics, the rising tide of frustration in the crowd. It was a common pattern I'd seen many times before, albeit usually in more volatile situations, a power play, an assertion of dominance, and the quiet fear of challenging authority. While this wasn't a crime scene, the principles of de-escalation and understanding human behavior still applied. My heart went out to James and Olivia. They had poured their energy and love into this event, only to have it summarily dismantled by one person's relentless adherence to regulations, a person who seemed to prioritize rules over the well-being and happiness of the community. Sarah Miller, Tommy's mom, stepped forward, her usual gentle demeanor replaced by a determined resolve. "Brenda Mae," she began, her voice steady despite the tension, "this is ridiculous. We've always had these parties. Are you really going to ruin it for the children?" Brenda Mae turned her gaze to Sarah, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Rules are rules, Sarah. They apply to everyone, regardless of age or sentiment. If we allow exceptions for one, the entire framework collapses. This is about maintaining order and property values." A collective sigh of exasperation swept through the parents. One father, a burly man named Frank who usually kept to himself, grumbled loudly, "Order? You call this order? You're just spoiling everyone's fun." Brenda Mae's eyes flashed, a brief flicker of annoyance crossing her usually composed face. "If you have a grievance with the HOA policies, Mr. Rodriguez, you are welcome to address the board during scheduled meetings. Until then, compliance is mandatory." Her tone left no room for argument. Reluctantly, slowly, people began to pack up their food. The children, sensing the shift from fun to formality, started to gather their toys, their earlier exuberance replaced by a quiet disappointment. James and Olivia, looking defeated, began to unhook the bouncy castle's air pump. The vibrant colors of the inflatable structure seemed to sag and dim as the air hissed out, a visual representation of the deflated mood in the park. It was a stark and disheartening sight. The party, so full of promise just moments before, withered and died under Brenda Mae's stern gaze, leaving behind a lingering bitterness. In the days that followed, Brenda Mae's actions at the park became the dominant topic of conversation in Willow Creek. It was discussed in hushed tones over fences, during dog walks, and at the community garden. There was a widespread sense of injustice, a feeling that she had overstepped her bounds, turning a celebration into a casualty of her rigid interpretation of HOA rules. Many residents felt a growing resentment towards her, a feeling that had been simmering beneath the surface for some time. Her earlier, smaller acts of scrutiny now seemed like harbingers of this more public display of power. I found myself reflecting on the incident, seeing it through the lens of my past experiences. In my previous role, I often encountered individuals who misused their authority, or those who, out of a misguided sense of duty, caused more harm than good. Brenda Mae fit a certain profile, someone who saw the world in black and white, who prioritized abstract rules over the nuanced realities of human interaction, and who was perhaps driven by a need for control. It wasn't purely malicious, I thought, but born from a deeply ingrained belief in her own righteousness. That didn't make it any less damaging to the community spirit. The incident also highlighted a broader issue, the balance between order and freedom, between regulations and the organic flow of life. I believed strongly in kindness and empathy. My career had taught me that genuine community safety wasn't just about enforcing laws, but about building trust, fostering understanding, and supporting one another. Brenda Mae's approach was the antithesis of that. It eroded trust, bred resentment, and created divisions where none should exist. I knew, with a quiet certainty, that something had to change. The community, even in its quiet suburban setting, needed a different kind of leadership, one rooted in compassion and genuine understanding, not just a rulebook. A few days after the park incident, I was at the community garden, tending to my growing tomato plants. The air was warm, and the rich scent of earth filled my nostrils. Olivia, the retired schoolteacher with the green thumb, was working on her plot nearby. Her usual cheerful demeanor was subdued, a clear sign that the recent events still weighed heavily on her. "It just doesn't seem fair, David," she said, her voice soft but tinged with sadness. "James and Olivia are such good people. And the children, they were so excited for that party." I nodded, pulling a stubborn weed from around a basil plant. "It was a shame, Olivia. A real shame." "Brenda Mae can be so difficult," she continued, sighing. "She means well, I suppose, in her own way, wanting to keep the neighborhood nice. But sometimes, she just takes it too far. She forgets about the people who live here, not just the houses. That's a common pitfall when you get too focused on the rules," I observed. "You start seeing lines on paper instead of the lives they affect." Olivia straightened up, wiping her hands on her gardening apron. "There's talk, you know. People are really upset. More than before. Some are even saying they might try to get her removed from the board." I considered this. While I didn't want to get directly involved in HOA politics just yet, a change in leadership might be what Willow Creek needed. "That wouldn't be an easy task, I imagine," I commented. "People rarely give up power willingly." "No, it won't," Olivia agreed, a thoughtful look on her face. "But sometimes, enough is enough. When you start ruining children's parties, that's when people really start to take notice." She paused, then looked at me, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "You always seem so calm, David. Even when things get tense. You have a very steady way about you." I offered a small smile. "Years of practice, Olivia. You learn to stay level-headed when things get chaotic. It helps you see things clearly." I left it at that, not wanting to delve into the specifics of my past career, though I appreciated her observation. Later that week, a new flyer appeared on the community bulletin board near the mailboxes. It was from the HOA, announcing a series of neighborhood enhancement initiatives. At first glance, the title sounded positive, even benign. However, upon closer inspection, the details revealed a chilling escalation of Brenda Mae's influence and control. The flyer outlined a mandatory, curb appeal, upgrade for all homes. This wasn't just about general tidiness. It specified approved color palettes for front doors, acceptable types of flower beds, and even the exact dimensions for garden gnomes and bird feeders. Any deviation would result in hefty fines, escalating with each infraction. The notice ended with a stern warning about non-compliance, leading to further punitive measures. But the most extreme and truly infuriating part of this new initiative was a specific clause about children's outdoor play. Section 7.3.d, titled Minimizing Recreational Disturbances, explicitly stated that excessive noise from unsupervised children, particularly loud games or boisterous laughter, is hereby deemed a nuisance and shall be subject to a warning, followed by progressive fines upon repeated violations. It went on to outline a new, quiet hours policy for children playing outside, even during daylight hours on weekends. This wasn't just about early morning or late night noise, it targeted the very essence of childhood play. The implication was clear: children were to be seen and not heard, their natural exuberance unwelcome in the supposedly peaceful confines of Willow Creek. The entire community gasped, not in words, but in a collective, silent intake of breath. This was too much. The park incident was one thing, but directly targeting the children's ability to play freely in their own yards, in broad daylight, was an unforgivable overreach. It felt like a direct assault on the innocence and joy that every neighborhood should foster. The flyer, with its sterile language and punitive tone, was a clear declaration of war on carefree childhood. It was a line in the sand, daring residents to cross it. A spark of defiance, tiny at first, began to flicker in the hearts of many, threatening to ignite into a roaring fire. The Neighborhood Enhancement Initiative's flyer landed like a grenade in the placid landscape of Willow Creek, tearing apart any lingering illusions of a harmonious community. The outrage was immediate and widespread, a collective groan of disbelief turning into a simmering fury. People weren't just whispering about Brenda Mae anymore, they were openly fuming. The curb appeal rules were an annoyance, a financial burden for some, but the clause about excessive noise from unsupervised children struck a raw nerve. It felt like a direct attack on the very essence of childhood, a stifling of natural joy in favor of an unnatural, pristine silence. Parents were particularly incensed, their protective instincts flaring up. How could anyone dictate when and how a child could laugh or play in their own yard? It was simply beyond comprehension. I saw the flyer posted on the community board myself, its rigid language a stark contrast to the colorful drawings of kids playing that often adorned the same space. My blood ran cold as I read the section about children's noise. This wasn't just overzealous rule-following, it bordered on psychological oppression. Children need to play, to express themselves, to explore their world with unbridled enthusiasm. To suppress that was to deny them a fundamental part of growing up. My years in law enforcement had taught me the importance of healthy community development, and stifling children's outdoor activity was antithetical to that. It created an unhealthy environment, breeding resentment and potentially leading to more significant issues down the line. I understood the desire for peace and quiet, but there was a vast difference between reasonable noise control and demanding a silent neighborhood. The backlash began almost immediately. Social media groups for Willow Creek residents, usually buzzing with recipes and lost pet alerts, erupted with angry posts. Petitions started circulating, passed from hand to hand in grocery stores and at the school pickup line. Residents, usually polite and reserved, now approached each other with a new, shared sense of indignation. The park incident, though frustrating, now seemed like a mere prelude to this outright assault on their way of life. The general sentiment was that Brenda Mae had finally gone too far. This wasn't just about property values anymore, it was about the very soul of their community. One afternoon, I was pulling weeds from my rose bushes when Sarah Miller walked over, her face set in a grim line, a stack of papers clutched in her hand. Tommy, usually bouncing, walked beside her, his head down, kicking at a pebble. "David, did you see this?" she asked, holding up a copy of the flyer. Her voice was tight with suppressed anger. "Minimizing recreational disturbances? This is insane. Tommy can't even play outside with his friends without risking a fine now. What kind of neighborhood is this becoming?" I nodded, my gaze sympathetic. "It's a gross overreach, Sarah. It crosses a line." "It's more than a line, David, it's a whole new battlefront," she said, her eyes flashing. "We're organizing a special meeting. Not just the regular HOA meeting, but a community-wide emergency meeting. We need to do something. This isn't right." She tapped the papers in her hand. "I'm helping collect signatures for Brenda Mae's removal from the board. Will you sign?" I took the petition from her, scanning the names already listed. Many familiar names were there. Without hesitation, I added my signature. "Absolutely, Sarah. This kind of oppressive overreach is detrimental to everyone. "Thank you, David," she said, her voice softening slightly. "It means a lot to know we're not alone. We're holding the meeting this Saturday at the community center. Please come. We need as many voices as possible." I assured her I would be there. This was no longer just a passive observation, it was a call to action. While I still preferred to keep my professional identity separate, my innate sense of justice compelled me to support my neighbors. My time as a sheriff had instilled in me a deep commitment to protecting the vulnerable and ensuring fairness. Children were the most vulnerable members of any community, and their right to innocent play was something worth defending. The special community meeting on Saturday was packed. The community center, usually half-empty for regular HOA meetings, was overflowing. People stood in the aisles, lined the walls, and spilled out into the hallway. The air was thick with anticipation and indignation. James and Olivia were there, their faces still etched with the disappointment of their ruined party, but now with a spark of determination. Frank Rodriguez, the burly father from the park, sat near the front, his arms crossed, a defiant look on his face. Olivia, the retired schoolteacher, was there too, sitting quietly but with a firm set to her jaw. Brenda Mae was also present, seated at the head table with the rest of the HOA board. Her expression was uncharacteristically strained, though she maintained a veneer of composure. She seemed aware of the palpable hostility in the room, but she faced it with her usual stubborn resolve. The meeting began with a brief, tense opening statement from the HOA president, a mild-mannered man named George who clearly looked uncomfortable in the face of such widespread dissent. He tried to explain the rationale behind the new initiatives, citing maintaining property values and ensuring consistent neighborhood aesthetics. But his words were quickly drowned out by frustrated murmurs and a few outright shouts of disagreement. Then, Sarah Miller stood up, holding the petition high. Her voice, though trembling slightly at first, grew stronger with each word. She spoke passionately about the importance of children's play, the joy it brought, and how the new rule stifled the very spirit of Willow Creek. She recounted the park incident, her voice cracking slightly as she described the children's disappointment. She then presented the petition for Brenda Mae's removal, its pages thick with signatures. A wave of applause and cheers erupted, punctuated by shouts of "Here, here," and "Remove her." Other residents stood up, one after another, sharing their own stories of Brenda Mae's overreach, their voices filled with frustration and anger. A young mother tearfully recounted how her son, usually boisterous and happy, was now afraid to play in their backyard, constantly looking over his shoulder for fear of being reported. An elderly couple spoke about how their grandchildren, who loved visiting, now wanted to stay indoors, worried about being too loud. The overwhelming sentiment was clear: Brenda Mae's rigid enforcement and draconian new rules were tearing the community apart. Brenda Mae finally stood, her face flushed, her voice cutting through the rising clamor. "I understand your concerns," she began, though her tone suggested anything but understanding. "But these rules are for the good of the community. They are designed to prevent chaos, to preserve the peace, and to protect your investments." She waved her hand dismissively at the petition. These emotional outbursts do not change the fact that rules are rules. We cannot allow individual sentiment to undermine the collective order. Her words only fueled the fire. The room erupted in shouts, some calling for her resignation, others for a vote of no confidence. It was a chaotic scene, far removed from the usually polite HOA gatherings. George, the president, pounded his gavel repeatedly, trying in vain to restore order. The meeting devolved into a heated shouting match, with Brenda Mae defiantly standing her ground against the tide of anger, her jaw set in stubborn defiance. It was clear that no resolution would be reached that night. The division was too deep, the emotions too raw. The meeting ended without any formal decisions, but with a promise of more conflict to come. In the aftermath of the chaotic meeting, the tension in Willow Creek escalated dramatically. The community was split, not cleanly down the middle, but with a large, vocal majority vehemently opposed to Brenda Mae's rigid enforcement, and a smaller, quieter faction who, either out of fear or genuine agreement, supported her. Signs began to appear on lawns, some politely stating, "Let kids play," others more pointedly declaring, "HOA overreach." Brenda Mae, undeterred by the widespread dissent, seemed to redouble her efforts. It was as if the community's anger only solidified her resolve, making her dig in deeper. She became more visible, her walks around the neighborhood more frequent, her scrutinizing gaze more intense. It was during this period of heightened tension that the situation truly became personal for me. I had largely avoided direct confrontation with Brenda Mae, preferring to observe and offer quiet support to my neighbors. However, my small act of kindness towards Mr. Henderson, combined with my signature on the petition, had clearly put me on her radar. I noticed her car slowing as she passed my house, her head turning to meticulously inspect my lawn, my flower beds, even the alignment of my mailbox. It was subtle, but unmistakable. I felt her eyes on me, a constant, low-level surveillance. One breezy afternoon, I was enjoying a cup of coffee on my front porch. My house, like most in Willow Creek, had a small, decorative garden gnome nestled among the petunias near the front door. It was a simple, harmless thing, a gift from my niece, a cheerful little ceramic figure that brought a touch of whimsical charm to the garden. I had placed it there months ago, never giving it a second thought. It was certainly not an excessive decoration, nor did it violate any of the original, reasonable HOA guidelines. Suddenly, Brenda Mae pulled up in her car, not stopping, but driving exceptionally slowly, her head craned towards my yard. She had a companion with her, a woman I recognized as another HOA board member, Ms. Albright, known for her meekness and quiet agreement with whatever Brenda Mae proposed. Brenda Mae's eyes, magnified by her thick glasses, fixated on my gnome. She made a sharp, almost imperceptible gesture towards it with her chin, then said something to Ms. Albright, who quickly jotted it down on a notepad. Then, without stopping, she sped up, disappearing around the bend. A few days later, a formal letter arrived in my mailbox. The envelope bore the official HOA logo, stern and uninviting. Inside, the letter was curt and to the point. It was a notice of violation. The violation, my garden gnome. According to newly clarified guidelines under the Neighborhood Enhancement Initiatives, garden statuary was now limited to naturalistic designs only, and my gnome, with its bright red hat and rosy cheeks, was deemed unnaturalistic and detrimental to the collective aesthetic harmony. The letter stated I had 48 hours to remove the offending gnome, or face an immediate fine of $100, with escalating penalties for each day of noncompliance. It also threatened further action, including potential liens on my property, if the violation was not rectified. I stared at the letter, a slow burn starting in my chest. A garden gnome? This was beyond petty, it was an act of deliberate provocation. It felt like a direct response to my support of the petition, a subtle act of retaliation. It wasn't about the gnome at all, it was about asserting dominance, about demonstrating her power to enforce even the most absurd rules. It was a clear warning, fall in line, or face the consequences. This was no longer just about neighborhood politics, it was a personal challenge, a direct confrontation. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I wouldn't back down. The situation had just shifted from an extreme community event to an intensely personal one, poised on the edge of something even more volatile. The notice of violation for my garden gnome sat on my kitchen counter, a stark white rectangle of absurd authority against the warm glow of my morning coffee. The $100 fine, the threat of escalating penalties, and the audacious mention of a lien on my property, all for a cheerful ceramic figure, ignited a slow, steady burn inside me. This wasn't just petty. It was a deliberate act of intimidation, a thinly veiled warning from Brenda Mae that my quiet support for the community's defiance would not go unpunished. My years as a sheriff had taught me to read between the lines, to recognize when a seemingly trivial incident was, in fact, a calculated power play. This wasn't about aesthetics, it was about control, about making an example out of me. I decided immediately that I would not remove the gnome. This wasn't a stubborn defiance born of childish pique, but a principled stand. Allowing Brenda Mae to dictate such a ludicrous detail would only embolden her, confirming her belief that she could impose any arbitrary rule she wished, no matter how ridiculous or how damaging to the community spirit. I had witnessed countless instances where unchecked power, no matter how small its initial scope, could eventually lead to much larger injustices. This gnome, in its bright red hat, suddenly became a symbol of resistance, a silent sentinel against overreach. News of my gnome violation spread quickly through Willow Creek. Sarah Miller stopped by later that day, her eyes wide with disbelief as I showed her the letter. "A gnome, David? This is incredible. She's really going for it now." "She is," I confirmed, folding the letter neatly and placing it back in its envelope. "And I won't be taking it down." Sarah smiled, a glimmer of admiration in her eyes. "Good for you. We need more people willing to stand up to her." She then shared an update on the community's efforts. The petition for Brenda Mae's removal had garnered even more signatures after the chaotic meeting, reaching nearly 70% of the households in Willow Creek. The residents were more united than ever in their opposition, fueled by Brenda Mae's increasingly aggressive tactics. There was talk of a recall vote, a formal process to remove board members who had lost the confidence of the community. It was a complex and challenging process, but the sheer volume of signatures provided a powerful mandate. The following days saw the tension in Willow Creek become almost tangible. Brenda Mae's car passed my house multiple times a day, her head turning sharply to check on the offending gnome. I'd catch her staring, sometimes even slowing to a crawl, her face a mask of disapproval. The first fine notice arrived, neatly tucked into my mailbox. I simply filed it away, unopened. Then came the second, the amount escalated, along with a warning about legal action. I treated them the same way. It was a waiting game, a test of wills. I knew she was expecting me to buckle, to remove the gnome and fall in line. But I wouldn't. My quiet defiance, however, seemed to act as a catalyst for Brenda Mae's extreme behavior. If she couldn't get me to comply with her petty rules, she would escalate. And she did. The target of her next and most shocking act of overreach was, once again, the children of Willow Creek, specifically Tommy Miller, Sarah's son. It was a Saturday morning, a beautiful day, perfect for playing outdoors. Tommy, along with two of his friends, Olivia's son, Ben, and another boy named Sam, were playing soccer in the Millers' front yard. Their giggles and shouts of "pass" and "goal" filled the air, the natural sounds of carefree childhood. They weren't excessively loud, just kids being kids, enjoying a sunny morning. The Millers' yard was spacious, and they kept their play well within their property lines. I was trimming a bush in my own yard when I heard a sudden, shrill sound. It was a whistle, sharp and piercing. My head snapped up, my eyes immediately scanning for the source. Brenda Mae stood at the edge of her property, which faced the Millers' home across the street, holding a gleaming silver whistle to her lips. She blew it again, a long, drawn-out blast that cut through the pleasant morning air. The boys, startled, froze, their soccer ball rolling to a stop. Sarah, hearing the whistle, rushed out of her front door, a worried expression on her face. "Brenda Mae, what are you doing?" she called out, her voice incredulous. Brenda Mae lowered the whistle, her eyes fixed on the boys, who were now looking confused and a little scared. "I am enforcing Section 7.3.d of the Neighborhood Enhancement Initiatives, Sarah. Minimizing recreational disturbances. Your children are creating excessive noise. It is disruptive." Tommy, his eyes wide, looked at his mom, then at Brenda Mae, his small face crumpling. "But we're just playing, Mrs. Miller," he said, tears welling up in his eyes. Brenda Mae remained unmoved. "The rule states, excessive noise, Tommy. And this is clearly excessive. This is a quiet, residential neighborhood, not a playground." She then pulled out a small, handheld decibel meter, the kind used to measure sound levels. She held it up, its digital display already showing a reading. Their current noise level exceeds the allowable limit for outdoor play during designated, quiet hours by a significant margin. "I have it recorded." Sarah was speechless, her mouth agape. This was a new low, even for Brenda Mae. Not only was she harassing children, but she was using a decibel meter to quantify their innocent laughter and shouts. It was dehumanizing, turning childhood joy into a measurable offense. "This is absolutely outrageous, Brenda Mae." Sarah finally managed to stammer, her voice shaking with barely suppressed fury. "You are harassing my son and his friends. They are just playing. They have a right to play in their own yard. They have a right to play within the established rules of this community," Brenda Mae countered, her voice unwavering, cold as ice. "And they are currently in violation. This is your first warning, Sarah. Future violations will result in fines, as outlined in the enhancement initiatives. I have recorded the time, date, and specific decibel reading." She made a show of writing in her small notebook. The boys, understanding the gravity of the situation, slowly started to gather their soccer ball and head inside, their shoulders slumped, their faces downcast. The bright light of their morning play had been cruelly extinguished. It was a heartbreaking sight. Sarah, her face red with a mixture of anger and humiliation, watched them go, then turned a glare on Brenda Mae. "You will not get away with this, Brenda Mae," she vowed, her voice low and dangerous. "You have gone too far this time." Brenda Mae merely offered a tight, humorless smile. "We shall see, Sarah. We shall see." With that, she turned and walked back to her house, her poodle, Sir Reginald, trotting dutifully at her heels, seemingly oblivious to the emotional devastation she had just wrought. I stepped out onto my lawn, watching Brenda Mae retreat, my jaw clenched. This wasn't just an extreme event, it was a psychological assault on innocent children, a cruel abuse of authority. My professional instincts screamed at me. Harassment, intimidation, creating a hostile environment, these were not just HOA violations, they were actions that eroded the fabric of a community and, in some cases, could even cross into legal boundaries. My internal debate about keeping my identity separate from my neighborhood life was rapidly dissolving. Brenda Mae had just pushed a button she didn't know existed, awakened a part of me that had been trained to protect, to serve, to ensure justice. The next confrontation, I knew, would be different. It wouldn't just be about a gnome. It would be about a community, about innocent children, and about a woman who had no idea who she had just truly threatened. The air around me crackled with an unspoken promise of reckoning. The sound of Brenda Mae's whistle, a harsh shriek interrupting the innocent laughter of children, echoed in the quiet streets of Willow Creek long after the boys had retreated inside. It wasn't just a sound, it was a symbol of her escalating tyranny, a blatant declaration that no aspect of neighborhood life was safe from her scrutiny. The incident with Tommy and his friends was a turning point. It shifted the community's anger from simmering frustration to outright indignation. Brenda Mae had not only crossed a line, she had trampled over it, demonstrating a complete disregard for the joy and well-being of the children she supposedly governed. My own resolve solidified. The gnome violation was one thing, a personal affront. But witnessing the distress of those boys, seeing their innocent play crushed by the arbitrary enforcement of a ridiculous rule, ignited a deeper sense of purpose within me. As a sheriff, my duty was to protect, to serve, and to maintain peace. That peace wasn't just the absence of crime, it was the presence of a safe, healthy environment where people, especially children, could thrive. Brenda Mae was actively undermining that. Word spread like wildfire. Parents recounted the decibel meter incident with a mixture of disbelief and fury. The once whispered complaints about Brenda Mae now became open condemnations. The community, already agitated by the park incident and the enhancement initiatives, found itself at a boiling point. The petition for Brenda Mae's removal gained even more momentum, signatures pouring in from previously hesitant residents who now felt personally offended. There was a palpable shift in the air, a sense that something major was about to happen. Sarah Miller, still seething from the incident, called me that evening. Her voice was tight, strained with emotion. "David, you won't believe what happened. The HOA just sent us a formal fine notice. $500 for excessive noise from minors." And they attached a printout from Brenda Mae's little decibel meter. Her voice broke with a frustrated sob. "Tommy is terrified to play outside now. He asked me if he was too loud for the neighborhood. Can you believe that?" My blood ran cold. "That's beyond unacceptable, Sarah. That's harassment. And it's deliberate targeting. What can we do, David?" she pleaded, her voice desperate. "We've signed petitions, we've held meetings. She just doesn't care." "We fight back, Sarah," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Not with anger, but with strategy. This isn't just about HOA rules anymore. This is about common decency and the well-being of our kids. This kind of behavior has legal implications beyond HOA bylaws." I stopped short of revealing my full identity, but a part of me, the sheriff, was already at work, analyzing the situation from a professional standpoint. The next few days were unusually quiet in Willow Creek, a tense calm before an anticipated storm. Children, once a vibrant presence in their yards, were now mostly indoors, playing quietly or venturing out only with hushed voices. It was an eerie silence, a testament to Brenda Mae's chilling effectiveness. My garden gnome remained defiantly in place, accruing theoretical fines, a tiny, colorful symbol of my silent protest. I observed Brenda Mae's movements, her increased patrols, her seemingly triumphant demeanor. She seemed to relish the quiet, mistaking the community's temporary retreat for permanent surrender. Then came the next extreme event, an act so brazen and personal that it shattered the illusion of any remaining peace in Willow Creek. It was a scorching afternoon, the kind where the air shimmered above the asphalt. I was inside, catching up on some paperwork, when my doorbell rang. It was Officer Reynolds, a young patrol officer from the county sheriff's department, looking uncomfortable. He was accompanied by Brenda Mae, who stood beside him, her face a mask of triumphant righteousness. "Mr. Anderson?" Officer Reynolds began, shifting his weight uneasily. "We received a complaint about your property." My brow furrowed. "A complaint? From whom?" My gaze flickered to Brenda Mae, whose smirk widened almost imperceptibly. "From the Homeowners Association, sir," Officer Reynolds replied, avoiding direct eye contact with Brenda Mae. "Specifically, regarding a unauthorized lawn ornament." He gestured vaguely towards my garden gnome. "My garden gnome?" I asked, feigning surprise. "Are you saying the sheriff's department is now enforcing HOA rules about garden gnomes?" Brenda Mae stepped forward, her voice cutting in, sharp and superior. "The HOA has exhausted all avenues, officer. Mr. Anderson has repeatedly ignored our notices, accrued significant fines, and shown blatant disregard for the rules that maintain our community standards. We have no choice but to involve law enforcement to ensure compliance." She then addressed me directly, her eyes glittering with what I now recognized as pure, unadulterated malice. "This is your last chance, Mr. Anderson. Remove that eyesore, or face legal action. We've filed a formal complaint. This is a matter of property nuisance and a breach of community peace." Officer Reynolds cleared his throat. Mr. Anderson, the complaint states that the HOA considers this a persistent nuisance. While typically we don't get involved in private HOA matters, a formal complaint filed with the county does require us to investigate and attempt to mediate. We're just here to inform you that if the item isn't removed, the HOA is threatening to pursue further legal action through the courts, which would then involve formal legal processes. He looked genuinely apologetic, clearly uncomfortable being used as Brenda Mae's pawn. This was a new level. Brenda Mae had gone beyond the HOA's internal mechanisms and dragged law enforcement into a dispute over a garden gnome. It was an abuse of the system, a waste of taxpayer money, and a calculated escalation designed to intimidate. She wasn't just relying on HOA bylaws, she was attempting to weaponize the legal system itself to enforce her petty vendettas. I looked at Officer Reynolds, a faint, almost imperceptible shake of my head. He was just doing his job, following protocol. Then, I turned my gaze to Brenda Mae. Her face was alight with smug satisfaction, believing she had finally cornered me, that the full weight of the law, however misused, was now on her side. She puffed out her chest slightly, her eyes narrowed in a victorious glint. "Is that so, Brenda Mae?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm, the kind of calm that only comes from years of facing true danger, a deep stillness before a storm. "You believe this gnome is a nuisance? And you believe you have the authority to involve the sheriff's department in such a trivial matter?" She laughed, a short, sharp bark of triumph. "I believe I have the authority to ensure compliance with our rules, Mr. Anderson. And if that requires involving the appropriate authorities, then so be it. You have been warned." My eyes met hers, and in that moment, the carefully constructed wall between my past and present crumbled. The quiet civilian life I had sought, the peaceful retreat, dissolved under the weight of her aggressive overreach. The sheriff in me rose to the surface, sharp and unwavering. This wasn't just a neighborly dispute anymore. This was a challenge to justice, a misuse of power that I was uniquely equipped to address. "Brenda Mae," I began, my voice now carrying a different kind of authority, one that was unmistakably official. "I understand your interpretation of the rules. But you have just made a grave mistake." Her triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Officer Reynolds, standing slightly behind her, seemed to notice the shift in my demeanor, a subtle straightening of my posture, a new weight in my voice. "A mistake?" Brenda Mae scoffed, trying to regain her composure. "What possible mistake could that be, Mr. Anderson? I'm simply enforcing the rules." "The mistake," I stated, my eyes locking onto hers, my voice now resonating with the quiet power of my true identity, "is that you just pulled a weapon, albeit a figurative one, on someone you fundamentally misunderstand. And you just threatened a county sheriff." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable, shattering the fragile peace of Willow Creek and marking the beginning of an entirely different kind of confrontation. The full weight of the reveal, though not yet entirely grasped by Brenda Mae, had been dropped, leaving her poised on the precipice of a shocking realization. The words hung in the humid air of Willow Creek, stark and undeniable. "The mistake," I stated, my voice now resonating with an undeniable authority, "is that you just pulled a weapon, albeit a figurative one, on someone you fundamentally misunderstand. And you just threatened a county sheriff." Brenda Mae's triumphant smirk dissolved instantly, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment, then a flicker of dawning horror. Her eyes darted from my steady gaze to Officer Reynolds, who stood frozen beside her, his own expression shifting from discomfort to wide-eyed astonishment. The young officer finally recognized the subtle shift in my posture, the unwavering calm in my eyes, the commanding presence that had suddenly emerged. He knew the look, the sound of it. He had heard it in the briefing room, seen it in seasoned veterans. He recognized the quiet confidence of a superior officer. A sheriff?" Brenda Mae stammered, her voice thin and reedy, completely devoid of its earlier belligerence. What are you talking about, Mr. Anderson?" This is ridiculous. You're just a resident. Her eyes, still trying to process the revelation, searched mine frantically for any sign of a lie, any crack in the facade. David Anderson, badge number 713, I stated, my voice clear and firm, the words rolling off my tongue with practiced ease. Retired last year from the Metro County Sheriff's Department. 20 years of service. You can confirm it, Officer Reynolds, if you like. I didn't need to show my badge, the quiet certainty in my voice was enough. Officer Reynolds, his face pale, immediately pulled out his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 213. Requesting immediate confirmation on a David Anderson, badge number 713, retired Metro County Sheriff's Department. Possible identity verification needed on scene. His voice, usually confident, now held a tremor of nervous respect. He understood the gravity of the situation. He had been unknowingly dispatched to mediate a dispute involving a respected, highly experienced, retired sheriff. And Brenda Mae had just made a very serious accusation, involving a police report, against someone with 20 years in law enforcement. Brenda Mae's face went from pale to a ghastly shade of white. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her freckles standing out starkly. Her perfectly coiffed hair suddenly seemed askew, her rigid posture crumbling. The carefully constructed image of authority she projected shattered into 1,000 pieces. The realization of what she had done, whom she had tried to intimidate and bully, began to sink in, heavy and unforgiving. Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape, for a way to undo the last few minutes, the last few weeks. But the gnome. She whispered, her voice barely audible. The absurdness of her complaint, now seen through the lens of her current predicament, hung like a lead weight. The gnome, I repeated, my gaze unwavering, is a piece of garden decor, Brenda Mae. Your attempts to weaponize the HOA, to harass my neighbors and their children, and now to misuse county resources and file a false report against a law enforcement officer, crosses several very serious lines. Just then, Officer Reynolds' radio crackled to life. Unit 213, confirming David Anderson, badge number 713, retired with honors from Metro County Sheriff's Department, served 20 years. Commendations for outstanding service and community relations. What's your 213? Officer Reynolds looked at me, then at Brenda Mae, a profound sense of awe and understanding settling on his face. He clipped his radio back to his belt. A mess. Mae, he said, his voice now firm and entirely professional, no longer showing discomfort, we need to have a serious discussion about the nature of this complaint. Filing a false report, or using the department for harassment, has significant legal consequences. His tone left no room for doubt. He had been sent on a fool's errand, and he was not pleased. Brenda Mae visibly deflated, her shoulders slumping. The triumphant gleam in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by something akin to fear. The entire balance of power in Willow Creek had just flipped on its head. The woman who had terrorized the neighborhood with rules and fines, who had silenced children's laughter and tried to control every aspect of her neighbors' lives, was now facing the full, legitimate authority she had so carelessly invoked. The sound of sirens, faint at first, then growing louder, filled the air. Not one, but two more patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing, pulling up behind Officer Reynolds' vehicle. It turned out Officer Reynolds had, out of an abundance of caution or perhaps a premonition, requested backup when he called in my name. Two more officers emerged, their expressions serious, looking from me to Brenda Mae, then to Officer Reynolds, who quickly began to explain the situation in hushed, professional tones. Word spread like wildfire through Willow Creek. Neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the flashing lights and the sudden commotion. Sarah Miller, her eyes wide, ran across the street. James and Olivia, their arms around each other, watched from their porch. Frank Rodriguez, the burly dad, stood at the end of his driveway, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. They saw Brenda Mae, no longer the imperious HOA queen, but a small, trembling woman surrounded by actual law enforcement. The whispers began, rapidly turning into excited chatter, then a collective gasp as the truth about David Anderson, the quiet neighbor, circulated. I stood calmly, observing the scene, a quiet sense of justice unfolding. My aim was never to wield my past authority as a weapon, but Brenda Mae's actions had left me no choice. She had not merely threatened a retired citizen, she had actively sought to abuse a system I had dedicated my life to upholding. Brenda Mae was taken aside by the officers, her voice now barely a strained whisper as she tried to explain, to backtrack, to mitigate the disaster she had brought upon herself. The formal complaint she had filed, the documented instances of harassment, the misuse of emergency services, all of it was now being scrutinized by the very authority she had mistakenly believed was on her side. The weapon she pulled had backfired spectacularly, threatening her own carefully constructed world. Later that evening, after the police cars had departed and the street had returned to a stunned silence, Sarah Miller came over, a hesitant smile on her face. "David," she began, her voice full of awe, you're really a sheriff? All this time?" I nodded, a slight smile playing on my lips. "Retired, yes. I came here for peace and quiet, Sarah. But some things are worth fighting for." You saved us, David," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You saved Willow Creek." The next HOA board meeting was very different. Brenda Mae was, predictably, absent, her position on the board effectively null and void. The community, galvanized by the dramatic events and the revelation of my true identity, had found its voice. The recall vote passed unanimously. George, the mild-mannered president, resigned, citing personal reasons, clearly overwhelmed by the events. A new, temporary board was quickly formed, composed of people like Sarah, Olivia, and Frank. Individuals who prioritized community welfare over arbitrary rules. The neighborhood enhancement initiatives, particularly the clause about children's noise, were immediately repealed. The fines issued to the Millers and myself were formally rescinded. The community garden gnome remained in its spot, a small, triumphant symbol of a battle won. Children's laughter once again filled the streets of Willow Creek, louder and more joyous than ever before. The community began to heal, slowly but surely, rebuilding the bonds that Brenda Mae had so carelessly tried to sever. My intention was never to become the neighborhood hero, but rather to simply find a quiet place to live. Yet, when confronted with injustice and the systematic bullying of innocent people, my training and my inherent sense of duty compelled me to act. The experience reinforced a profound truth. True peace isn't found in rigid rules and enforced silence, but in the vibrant, sometimes messy, spirit of a community that values kindness, empathy, and the simple joy of everyday life. Brenda Mae had learned a powerful, unforgettable lesson: never underestimate the quiet neighbor, and never, ever, pull a weapon on someone without knowing exactly who you're threatening. The tranquility of Willow Creek had been violently shaken, but it had emerged stronger, wiser, and infinitely more unified.